All right, let's get started. So we are going to launch into lecture 14. And we are sort of still in this section on investing in human capital. And that actually brings me to the first clicker question. So I just wanted to kind of get people's reactions. I did mix up the content a little bit this term, and I just want to get people's reactions about which of the 5 modules we've done so far have sort of been the most interesting and informative for you, just for feedback for me, so I can maybe modify things next year. So any kind of thoughts or reactions on which of these things? The first couple weeks were on broad patterns. Then we did economic growth theories. Then we got into the Bloom and Sachs, and the deworming, and the geography, health, and development. The HIV weeks, you guys, we just did, and now we're just starting on human capital. So we'll just take another 20 seconds if people want to give their opinion. Okay. So just so I guess we're on the same page, let's see. So there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest in the geography, health, and development, and then also the HIV/AIDS, human capital. Quite a bit of interest in each of the modules, maybe with the most on the geography, health, and development. Cool. Okay. Thanks, guys. It's useful for me. Great. Okay. Problem set 2 is due on Tuesday, and then the midterm is the following Tuesday. In class this upcoming Tuesday, I'll say a few words about the midterm. The questions on the midterm will be similar to the ones you've seen on a couple problem sets so far, but I'll discuss them a little bit more on Tuesday. Any questions before I get started? Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll talk on Tuesday about it just because you'll still have a week, but the basic idea is, everything's fair game. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on what we did in lecture. And there's a lot of different things going on in the class. There's some formal models, like the growth model and HIV model. There's some econometric methods. And then there's some big picture discussion about these broad themes. And those are kind of the 3 types of questions I could put on the midterm. So a lot of the models and stuff are really on the lecture side. Some of the readings have some of the broader discussion. So but I'll talk more on Tuesday. But you should be ready for those 3 types of questions. Great. Okay, I just want to wrap up the Girls Scholarship Program that we talked about last time. We really got through the main results, and we were just getting into some of the interpretation at the end of lecture last time. So what we basically found was the test scores in Busia, the one district where the program was sort of well received, improved a lot. There were 0 effects in this other district, Teso, which we went through last time. And that's encouraging because having higher test scores, or more generally better human capital, could benefit people's lives in a whole range of different ways. So that's a kind of optimistic first finding. And last time at the end of class, we talked about what the different channels might be that explain those patterns, teacher behavior, student behavior. There are a couple open questions, and we're really going to focus more on these next lecture. I'm just flagging them. There are issues of whether these impacts will last over time. To the extent that people studied harder because of the incentive and they basically just crammed for a test, then it's not clear that it generated any really lasting change in their ability or their knowledge. So next time I'm going to talk about the longer term impacts. There was this broader issue about cash incentives destroying the love of learning, which again would be relevant in the long run. And then a set of issues around the empowerment of these young women or changes in local social norms that are fascinating. And again, when I talk about the kind of medium run, long run follow-up, we'll talk about the social and political attitudes of the women in the sample, just to get a sense of how being part of this scholarship program changed their attitudes. And there are some changes that we find. So these are questions I'm going to table for now, but I just want to sort of close the circle on it now. The other aspect of the Girls Scholarship Program that's worth talking about is a different question than the one we've been talking about so far. So far, we've been comparing the treatment group and the control group and saying, if you're in a school with one of these incentive programs, what happens to you? Do you study harder? Do you get better test scores? A separate question is, what is the impact of winning one of these scholarships, being in that top 15% of girls, on your life outcome? So we're going to transition to this other angle because it's going to give us an entree into studying regression discontinuity methods, which is our next econometric method in the course. And then we're going to go into real detail on this method later on in lecture day with the Lucas and BT article. So what did winning the award do? The girls who won the award, do they look different 5 years later, or do they have different medium to long run outcomes? There's a couple reasons why you might see there might be effects. So $38 is a decent amount of money. Was that enough money to help families keep these girls in school, sort of keep their schooling going in a poor rural area? That's one possibility. That basically these households are credit constrained. Even if there were high returns to their daughters continuing to go to school, if they didn't have the cash on hand, they might not be able to continue sending them. But this money kind of eased that constraint. That's one possibility. There's another possibility, which is a little fuzzier and harder to put our fingers on, but it has something to do with the non-monetary benefits of winning. So sure, you win an award, you get money, but winning an award does something to you. Winning an award makes you proud of yourself. It makes your family proud of you. It makes your community proud of you. Maybe it changes your self-image. Maybe before winning the award, you thought, I'm an okay student, but after winning the award, you think you're a really good student, or you just have different aspirations for the future. So it's going to be hard to kind of disentangle these sorts of effects, but they both could be playing some sort of role here. Okay. The problem for us in figuring out the impact of winning the scholarship goes back to our early discussion a few weeks ago about omitted variables. The winners and the non-winners are different, potentially really different. Like the winners have really good test scores, and the non-winners don't have very good test scores. So comparing winners and non-winners combines 2 things. It combines winning the award and any impact of winning the award with any impact of being a better student versus a weaker student. And the question is, how can we disentangle those 2 conceptually distinct effects? So let me show you a couple figures, and regression discontinuity methods are the most visual methods in applied econometrics. They're really great to see. So we're going to have a lot of graphs and figures today, maybe part of next time. So this figure, let me just move the little box up there. Doesn't block, sorry. Okay, so the y-axis here, the vertical axis, is educational attainment between 2005 to 2007. Why those years? Those are the years we did a follow-up survey. About 5 years after the 2001 Girls Scholarship Competition, we did a follow-up survey. Educational attainment means years of schooling. How many years did you complete of schooling? The horizontal axis is your score in 2001. So imagine that in the control group, say, where there was no scholarship, there was no competition, we'd probably imagine that the relationship between years of schooling and test scores would look something like this. It would be upward sloping. In other words, the kids who were good students would get more schooling. They'd get more schooling because they were able to get into better high schools or colleges. They'd get more schooling simply because kids who are good in school tend to stay in school a long time. They're successful there. There are higher returns to them, presumably, from staying in school than for the weak students. So either the returns are just inherently higher, and or they're just able to continue because you can only gain admission to the next level of schooling if you're a good student. So we'd expect a relationship like this. This is the control group, let's just say. Now, in the treatment group, things look a little different. Now we have a cutoff score. I'm just going to put it there somewhere in the middle. This cutoff score was the score you needed, say, in Busia district to win a scholarship. These folks win the scholarship. These folks don't win the scholarship. if we compare winners and losers, and we just compare the average test scores of winners and losers, even if there's no effect of winning the award, so the relationship between baseline test score and years of schooling is exactly the same in the treatment group and the control group, we run into a problem, which is the winners, on average, have higher test scores than the losers. So if we compared winners and losers in a naive way and said, let's regress years of schooling on being a winner of the scholarship, we'd get this huge estimated test score effect. It's just mechanical. I'm not telling you anything that isn't obvious in 2 seconds, but it just points to the difficulty in running our basic regression of your outcome on some sort of score, or your outcome on winning the award, I should say. Okay, so that's the challenge. So what can we do? Clearly, just comparing winners and losers isn't very appealing. One way to start getting around this problem, though, and I think this is very intuitive, is not to look at the full range of test scores, from top to bottom, but to start focusing on a narrow window right around the winning test score threshold. So think of this kind of conceptually. Instead of looking at everybody, we're going to look at people who basically barely won the award versus those who barely lost the award, and see if there's any effect there. So what does that look like? Now the vertical red lines that I put on the slide are this narrow window we're going to look at. Now all of a sudden, by looking in that narrow window, we're not necessarily getting a huge sort of fake, inappropriate, spurious treatment effect. Any treatment effect is going to be much smaller right near that window in the absence of an actual effect of winning the award. So one piece of intuition with regression discontinuity methods is you want to get as close to the threshold as you can, because the people close to the threshold are basically just like each other, plus maybe a little bit of noise. So when you take a test, you have a good day, you have a bad day, the test sort of covered what you studied or didn't study, there's some noise, there's some sort of measurement error in capturing how good a student you actually are. So the people that are very close to each other maybe differ only by noise. That's one way of thinking of the difference between them. The other thing that becomes obvious is to use these regression discontinuity methods, you really need a lot of data. So you really need to have a lot. If you want to precisely estimate any of these differences right near the threshold, you would need a lot of students right near that threshold. If you only had a few, you're in an issue with a very small sample, you'll have very big standard errors, very imprecise estimates. So regression discontinuity methods are very attractive when you have a lot of density, a lot of observations near the threshold you're studying. So just keep that in mind. That's a very important point. Okay, in the limit, and this is just sort of another way of saying what I just did, in the limit, if we compare literally the last student who barely won the award, to the first student who barely didn't qualify, again, they may only be separated by epsilon, by something tiny. They're basically equivalent, so comparing their outcomes is attractive because they're almost identical. Okay. Let me pause and see if there's any questions on the basic idea behind regression discontinuity. Beyond test scores, can anybody think of any other settings where you might use this kind of approach? What's another context or situation? With test scores, it's pretty straightforward, right? Sometimes for admission, you need a certain score or there's a cutoff. What are some other settings? So give an example.
So say for people that have the same issue and need surgery or something like that, the rate at which people get the surgery just before they are eligible for Medicare and just after they're eligible?
Yeah, so for Medicare, if you're 64 years and 11 months old, you don't get this very generous sort of public healthcare plan. And if you're 65 years, 1 day old, you do. And there is evidence, as you said, that medical treatment and health outcomes are much better once people turn 65 because they get to access all this healthcare. In the back. Yeah, lots of countries have what are called means-tested programs, which are basically income-tested programs. If you're below the actual poverty line or some percentage of the poverty line, you qualify, and if you're above them, you don't. And therefore, again, you might have a very sharp discontinuity in eligibility. Martin? Yeah, there could be different states, there could be different towns. Different towns have different property taxes, different towns have different policies, different states do. So again, if you're basically right near a border, the land may kind of be the same, the people may be similar, but you may have very sharp differences in policy. Some people have used an idea sort of like that with some major historical discontinuity. So, the splitting of Germany into West Germany and East Germany after World War II, the splitting of Korea into North Korea, South Korea, et cetera, where, before that division, there was really, these countries were seamless along what became a very hard border. So you can look across the border over time to see how these different policies and institutions affect outcomes. Yeah. Okay, and what is that based on? What is the kind of discontinuity? Maybe because the crime they committed was like slightly more severe or something. So maybe if you steal $1 million, you get sent to one prison. If you steal 900-something thousand, you get sent to another. Then those are similar crooks, but they may have a very different prison experience. Okay, so you guys get the idea that there's a whole range of places. And actually, a lot of what the examples you guys have given have been studied. So people have used these discontinuity methods in a lot of different settings. Test scores are just a really clean way to think about them. In development, this class talks a lot about anti-poverty programs. There's also a big literature in development using these other discontinuities, whether it's healthcare access or means-tested welfare programs, et cetera. Okay. Now, in reality, when we use the data, we don't actually only use the data right around the threshold. There's usually some limitation to near the threshold. But then to deal with the fact that there's some underlying trend, say here in the test score, some underlying relationship between the test score and schooling attainment, we control for that with regression terms. So in the plot that I showed you, that relationship looked really linear, right? Basically, higher test score folks had more schooling attainment. In other cases, it might be slightly nonlinear, but if you control for the test score and the test score squared to try to get at some curvature, you could probably capture that relationship pretty well. So in practice, we don't necessarily need to go only right to the threshold. Now, if we had enough data, if we had millions of observations and we could look right at the threshold, that would be the ideal. We wouldn't have any regression adjustment. But if we have a little bit less data, we can bring in more of the data and control for the relationship between the test score, or in other cases, what's called the running variable. So in the case of income, a welfare program for the poor, the running variable is called would be income. You control for that flexibly, and you estimate the discontinuity. So the discontinuity is basically the jump at the threshold when we control flexibly for any underlying relationship between the eligibility variable and the outcome. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to be linear. You could have linear, quadratic, cubic, quartic. You could have very flexible controls to try to capture any underlying relationship, and then see if even controlling for those terms, you still get a jump at the discontinuity. And that's what people do. They tend to put in polynomial controls to try to capture that pretty flexibly. And what you typically do is you'll allow for different relationships on both sides of the threshold, just in case. So, graphically, imagine instead of this relationship being smooth in the treatment group, it actually looks something like this. This would be, just visually, this is why they call it discontinuity, regression discontinuity. At a threshold, you see a jump. Basically, the estimated relationship isn't continuous. It jumps up at a certain point. Even though the relationship is more or less linear along the way, there's clearly an effect at the threshold for the GSP losers and winners. And here I'm calling treatment being a winner. And treatment equals 0 means you didn't get the award. So this is different than what I was calling being in a GSP treatment school and control school. This is a different treatment. The treatment here is winning scholarship, basically. So I'm using that same language. And this jump is the regression discontinuity estimate of the impact. So this is the basic idea. You control as flexibly as you can on both sides of the threshold for the underlying relationship and see if the dummy variable at the threshold, the indicator variable, the 0, 1 variable at the threshold, is significantly different than 0. That's basically what's done in the regression. Yeah, Yeah, so the estimate of the effect is basically that vertical distance between the red points. That's right. That's the discontinuity. That's the jump. Let me pause and see if there's any questions. How many people have studied regression discontinuity and econometrics? A couple people. A few people. Okay, good. It's just a method that isn't quite as widely taught as some of the other stuff we do in this class. But it's becoming more popular over time. Okay, so let me just give you a little bit of, this is a bit of, there's a lot on the slide, but let me tell you where some of the data comes from. 5 years after the original Girls Scholarship Program, we went back out to try to find the girls from the original program. And we asked them a whole range of questions. We administered tests to them to try to get at their academic performance, how good they could read, how good they could do math, etc. We collected data on whether they were in school or not to figure out if there was a schooling attainment effect. We also figured out, we asked them whether they were working, how much they were earning, if they were married, just all these different life outcomes. We also asked about a bunch of political attitudes, which I'll talk about next lecture. And we managed to find 82% of the sample, and another couple percent were either dead or we couldn't interview them for some reason. Some were either dead or were disabled, so we couldn't basically survey them. Well, when most were around 20, so late teens, early 20s. And we only conducted the data collection in Busia district. So remember, in Teso district, a lot of schools dropped out. There was a lot of resistance to the program. We basically didn't go back to do data collection in Teso, in part because there just had been such a difficult, it had been a very difficult experience collecting data, doing research, doing development programs there. Plus, there had been no short-run effect. So in some sense, there was no long-run effect to assess. There had been no short-run effect. In Busia, there was a short-run effect. The program was well administered, so we collected data in Busia. And that gives us our first, and then what we do, we collect this data and we ask the question, if you were a winner of the scholarship, and we compare it to someone who lost the scholarship using this regression discontinuity approach, what happened? It turns out that the young women who won the scholarship have completed significantly more schooling 5 years later. On average, about 0.19 or say a fifth of a year more schooling, and that's a significant effect. So winning the scholarship actually led them to get more schooling, which means that the money they got or this recognition or this change in self-perception had some kind of effect. So graphically, if we were to look at this, the difference between the GSP near losers, the people who almost won, and the GSP, I should say barely winners, was about 0.19 years, and that was significant. So there was actually an effect of winning the program. Giving these girls scholarships helped them get more schooling. Yeah. In the other district? Well, in the other district, as we talked about a bit on Tuesday, a number of NGOs have found it difficult to do development projects there. It was a bit less cosmopolitan a district, a bit less educated district, and the NGO that we worked with sort of got off on the wrong foot in that district, and all these things kind of piled onto each other. And then, as I mentioned last time, there was this terrible lightning strike early on in the program that just sort of solidified people's fears about working with the NGO. So we didn't continue working in that district. So there's no effective compulsory education in Kenya. Yeah. There might be, and when we talk about the follow-up data, I'll mention more about that. Of course, the higher the percentage you can survey, the better, because then there's less sort of possibility of missing data. One of the things we did with the follow-up there, when we compare GSP treatment and control, is there's almost exactly the same tracking rate across the two groups of schools. So at least it looks like the broad patterns of tracking are similar. But once you have anything, say, less than 100% or less than 95 or 90-something% tracking, there is this possibility that for some reason the types of people you're able to find differ, and it's just hard to completely rule that out. Now, in the case of the people near the threshold, we had very similar tracking rates of people on both sides of the threshold again. So there's no kind of blatant evidence for that problem. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point. If it were the case that the people who just barely lost really got demoralized, what would we sort of expect this figure to look like? What would be a pattern in the data that would be kind of consistent with this hypothesis? Can anybody? Radhika? Yeah, you might expect that these folks here get depressed or demoralized. And so if you see that kind of pattern just below a threshold, it's consistent with that kind of view. We don't. This is made up data. I'm going to show you the real data for VT because I'm showing you a beautiful graph just to link up to our conceptual stuff. But we also don't find any of that kind of dip. But if you did, the problem with that, and people are very concerned with exactly the effect that you said, is imagine if you found that kind of a dip because of demoralization, then you would estimate this like massive effect. But the massive difference is not just the effect of winning. It's the combined effect of winning and just barely losing. And that's a different thing from a policy point of view than the effect of winning. So it's very important to sort of try to rule out those effects. Yeah. Say that again? You're saying we're assuming that